thank you very much for the to the organizers to set up this this nice conference. And yeah, since it's already a little bit late in the week and we had many talks and we are supposed to be like the session with many formulas, I would like to try to avoid that, and to maybe also go along the lines of the name of these conferences, which should be interdisciplinary and also about challenges. So it's more about open question probably maybe than closed and well-defined results in non-equilibrium physics. So saying that, I would like to go through some ideas and in general about non-equilibrium physics. And so I would like to start just to remind all of us that non-equilibrium physics is very general in nature, and maybe there are a few. I want to list a few examples that are probably that were not fully mentioned in these talks in these weeks up until now. For example, we can think about of all the biochemical processes that go on in our body, in our cells. So metabolic networks, they work far from equilibrium because essentially they work between chemostats. We put in sugars, we take out waste in order to produce ATP. For example, in this cartoon is what happens in our mitochondria, in our intermediate metabolism. But also our entire society is based on essentially electronics and computation. And all this is done because we have electrical power supply. And in particular, these days, electronic computation and so the energy that is consumed by this is becoming important for both because of concerns regarding the amount of energy that we are going to consume in the near future for computations that is imposed by and the limits that are imposed by thermal fluctuations at a small scale. So the fact that we cannot miniaturize things. So non-equilibrium and fluctuations are important in this setup. If we move even farther, of course, we have that we are here because the Earth itself is working between essentially two reservoirs, the sun that is inputting high energy photons, and like the outer space that is receiving high entropy photons emitted by the Earth. And even at the full level of the cosmos, essentially everything we see is because of, we think, initial non-equilibrium states that was there, and we are essentially relaxing towards equilibrium. So there are different kind of non-equilibria that I would like to probably mention and try to categorize in some way, and maybe starting probably from the last one that I mentioned. So systems that relax from an initial dynamics that take place in conservative forces, and so we say that they take place because the dynamics is detail balance. Whenever we jump from a state I to a state J, and vice versa, the ratio of these two probabilities is exponential in the difference between the energies scaled by the temperature of the system, of the bath the system is in contact with. So this is the simple cartoon that I have in mind. We start from a condition that is not the equilibrium one. This probability is concentrated in one minima of the energy. And we would like to reach the final equilibrium state where also the higher energy is populated. Of course, from a thermodynamic perspective, what is going on is that we are dissipating something. So we are producing entropy that on average is positive. And this is because in the setup, we are changing the free energy of the system. So the average energy minus the, if you want, Gibbs entropy calculated over the instantaneous probabilities, they are changing over time. And so this is the entropy production that is, so this is the dissipation that is driving the dynamics. Of course, this can be extremely complicated if we bring on stuff like thermodynamic limits, disorder, and so on. And so we can have all kind of problems like localization, glassiness, and there are people in the audience that know much more than me about these things. But there is we can also look at another class of systems that are out of equilibrium that I mentioned in the introduction. And these are systems that are out of equilibrium because they are in contact with multiple reservoirs, thermal reservoirs, chemical reservoirs, and so on and so forth, that they kept them out of equilibrium. So here the dynamics is not fully conservative. We are not just moving some potential landscape, but the transition between two states ij triggered by the contact with a reservoir nu, they are now, due to the variation in energy between the two states, but also because there is some work that is continuously done by that reservoir in going from I to J. And this work cannot be split into a difference of state functions. And all that is weighted by the temperature of the particular reservoir. And this temperature can be different from reservoir to reservoir. So here, what I have in mind and what it was considered originally, like usual in the 20th century, are like macroscopic systems that are under the action of thermal gradient, as you can see here, or concentration gradient, and so on and so forth. The point is that as long as these imposed thermodynamic forces are at the boundaries or on the large scales, the molecular constituents we know are insensitive to those gradients. So essentially, we can treat this stuff in many cases by means of hydrodynamic theories of that. And if you want to do thermodynamics via the standard irreversible thermodynamics, where currents of energy, matter, charges, and so on and so forth, they are linear in the forces that we applied. And these forces are just gradients of inverse temperature, pressure, chemical potential, and so on. The point is that, and becomes, I would say, more interesting when now these imbalances, these forces, this work that we do is done at the microscopic level. And here I put an example, which is, for me, it's a paradigmatic one. So this thing is the ATP synthase, and is essentially what powers us, because 80% of the energy in our metabolism is produced by this. Using a proton gradient across this mitochondrial membrane, essentially this synthase is powering the production of ATP out of ADP. And of course, at these levels, the currents, so in this case, the number of molecules of ATP produced per unit seconds, are certainly not linear in the forces that we are imposing. So the difference in chemical potentials between the protons on the two sides of these membranes. And this is something very, very important that's already differentiate the non-equilibrium at the macroscopic level from these macroscopic equilibria. That forces can be highly nonlinear, and they are exploited. So if we remain in the context of biochemistry, what I want to show here it's a simple enzymatic reaction where some substrate is transformed into some product catalyzed by some enzyme here. 20% of the enzymes in our body, they do not work like only just in the first line of this chemical reaction. They also have this second step, which is called substrate inhibition. So a second substrate can bind the enzyme, producing a compound. If you have these kind of things, and you do have it in 20% of your enzymes, the average current, so the production of P that takes place over time, as a function of the imposed difference in the chemical potentials of S and P, is a highly nonlinear function of this driving force. And actually, it has a nice feature that it grows and reaches a maximum. And if you put in some physiological values, for example, these are values for the production of dopamine, is an hormone in our brain, you can see that physiological values over time, so during a day, they are here in this strip here, and they are very close to the maximum of the average current produced. So this means that the system reaches homeostasis or maintains homeostasis. So it's the output current is almost irrelevant to variation of the concentration of SP, using the fact of being out of equilibrium. And of course, it does that. You may notice that producing or spending much less energy that it then using a simple reaction that would be there if just the first line, were there. In that case, we would have just this curve. It's a Michaelis-Menten curve, and we would reach a plateau only for very, very much larger value of this force, and so much larger dissipations. So all this framework, so where we can look at nonlinear currents and also the fluctuations, because here I was just talking about mean values, is nowadays well described by stochastic thermodynamics, and I think that Gatien is going to give you an overview about that. The main difference of this kind of non-equilibria with respect to the ones that I showed you before is that the dissipation that takes place is not because we are relaxing in a free energy, in some kind of free energy landscape, but this system, they can operate at steady state, and it dissipates because of the product of forces and these thermodynamic forces. And so what I wanted to tell you is that in this kind of non-equilibrium systems, the nice thing is that since we are continuously dissipating energy, we can create states that are forbidden at equilibrium. And here, remaining the context of biochemistry, if you want, I'm putting two typical examples. So these are, for example, waves and patterns that help in all the life-sustaining processes that going on in our cells. So just let me just explain a little bit better what I mean by dissipative states, and stick again to network of chemical reactions to give an idea. So chemical reaction at the microscopic level, they can be described by looking at all the molecules, the number of molecules that react in a volume V, and I will have a probability for observing this number of molecules that will evolve because of a stochastic equation or a master equation. At the macroscopic level, so when I consider many molecules in a large volume, well, I have the equation of chemistry. I have rate equation that tells me how the concentration changes in time because of some nonlinear reaction rates that change the number of molecules in my system. How do they? How do these two definitions? How these two dynamics how are they connected? Well, the point is that when I consider a large system, essentially the probability to observe some molecules of better concentration, they become very well picked around the deterministic dynamics, essentially. So this means that this is the picture. At the microscopic level, there's some dynamics in the space of a number of molecules. When I go to larger volumes and molecules, I have that a landscape emerges that in general is not related to the free energy landscape of the system. And so the concentration changes in this landscape, and if only just at the mean field level, let's say at the pure macroscopic level, I have deterministic dynamics into single basin of attractions. But at the mesoscopic level, it remains defined stochastic dynamics between the various attractors of these non-equilibrium dynamics. The important thing, and here what I mean by dissipative states, is that if I consider, for example, ideal chemical reactions, so solutions of chemicals that do not interact, but apart from on contact, changing one into the other. So the free energy of the system is a function with one minimum only, and it's in general different from this landscape that emerges here that can be multi-stable. So I can have multiple minimum. And so going out of equilibrium, so removing lifting the condition that this phi must be the free energy as it should be at equilibrium, I can create states at the cost of dissipating energy that they are functional state for living. For example, they are genetic state in our regulatory networks in our cells. So I just want to give another example just before concluding, where that is taken from the original examples that I give you, to make it even more concrete, if you want. Well, in electronic circuits, we rely on these dissipative states for essentially everything. For example, a fast memory in our computer is created by logical states, so values of bits that are non-equilibrium steady states. They are usually created, as you can see here, by in this way, by putting together some transistors. They are fed by voltages, so they are maintained out of equilibrium by two voltages that are different. And in the conditions that are relevant for our computers, the probability to observe voltages V1 and V2, so the output, are essentially have this exponential form. And this function phi here, which is similar to the function that I showed you in the previous slide, is picked around these two values. And these are essentially the bit. This can be assigned as value 0 and a value 1. And this is only possible because we are out of equilibrium. Because in equilibrium, that phi would be the electrostatic energy of our system, which is just quadratic in the potential. And so it would have only a minimum. So you see that dissipating continuously energy, we can create logical states. And you can also show that essentially the error rate, so the probability to jump from one state to the other, so to lose the memory, is decreased whenever we increase the dissipation. So what I want to finish with is what happens now when we go to even more complicated non-equilibrium system. And with this, I mean, when we cannot distinguish anymore the thermal, chemical, or whatever reservoirs with which our system is in contact, because they are too many, or because we forget some degrees of freedom. Well, this is for me is where the big open challenge in this framework of non-equilibrium physics relies. I mean, when we look at the dynamics in these emerging macroscopic and dissipative states, well, we cannot use any longer condition of local detail balance, because energy is burned to maintain each single state. So it's not burned only in transitions. And in another context that was probably mentioned in these days, is when we look at part of a system. For example, here I have the example of, I don't know, some probe particles, some large colloids in a non-equilibrium bath of active particles. If we want to understand how much energy can be extracted really from the internal, from the chemical energy burned, for example, from one of these active particles, can be a motile bacteria, or if you want to understand the interactions that are mediated by the non-equilibrium environment, well, this is where we have to look at system. Essentially, we have to explore this direction of systems that are in contact with many multiple baths, and where many questions to me remains to be understood. So I think I don't want to go through this very previous slide, and I want to jump directly to the outline. So what I wanted to tell you here was just that There are many different kind of non-equilibrium systems that I try to categorize in these two ways: relaxing ones, the ones that are continuously maintained out of equilibrium, and we can track the energy exchanges that they have. And those that, despite being maintained out of equilibrium, they have so many baths that, or because of a thermodynamic limit, we lose track of the energy inputs. And in all cases, there are currents, there are states, and a fluctuation, and the interactions that are not attainable, but the very same system when it is not driven. And just with these ideas and with this sketch, I want to leave you. And thanks for listening. And if you have any question, I'm here to answer if I can.
Yeah, maybe just one. It's not required to have dissipation to make a memory, because I mean, a hard drive is something which is not out of equilibrium.
True. But a hard drive is a memory that you leave there and you don't touch. When you want to a fast memory, something that you want to access and change rapidly, these are the memories that you find in your RAM.
The RAM one, yes.
Yeah. So these are the memories, the CMOS memories implemented by CMOS transistors. Those are the memories that you use in your computer, and that's why your computer is heating up so much.
And the MRAMs, the MRAMs, modern ones, they will dissipate as well?
I think so, yes.
But anyway, it can be out of equilibrium very slow. So, I mean, a memory like electrostatic, I think SD drive are based on this kind of metastable states. So if it's metastable state, it has not yet happened.
Well, these metastable states, as the point is, regards, first of all, the miniaturization. So when you go to a very small, as we are doing, if you make them smaller, of course, the fluctuations become more relevant. So what I was saying is that if you want to stabilize these states, you have to dissipate more. Essentially, you have to make deeper the landscape that I showed you, that quasi potential that I showed you. This is the first point, and it is known nowadays that this kind of this way of losing memory is this error rate due of jumping out of this metastable state is contributing starting to contribute to soft errors in computations. So it's becoming nowadays an issue, if you want.